Ahoy! History 365. So today we're going to be talking about naval warfare and the impact of guns on naval warfare, which leads to really over the course of the 16th and into this early 17th century, again, a complete revolution of what naval warfare looks like. Now, up till now, there's really two basic ways that you fight with a ship, and these haven't changed all that much since the Peloponnesian War or the second or the first Punic War. You can have a ship and you can either ram another ship and try to sink it that way, where you literally have to maneuver into another ship and hit that moving target. Or you can equally maneuver upside an enemy ship, find a way to grapple alongside it, and then try to board it and essentially turn this into a floating infantry fight. This is actually the preferred Roman way of combat. Now, both of those are, you basically require the ships to come into extremely close contact with each other. But they also actually involve a high degree of maneuverability, right? To actually ram a ship, you have to, there's a kind of game of chicken that takes place. And oftentimes the crew that is the most maneuverable, that can shoot in and then come in at the side or the rear, what the Greeks call a diekplous, is the ship that's going to win in a contest with ramming. And even if you're simply trying to board a ship, that still means that you have to find a way to get up close alongside it where you can actually be in a position to board, particularly if it doesn't want to be boarded. The tendency, therefore, is to make warships as light and maneuverable as possible, although there is clearly a trade-off between adding more banks of oars, which may give you power and speed, even if it makes the warships somewhat slower and less maneuverable. That's kind of basically the basic trade-off in ship design that goes all the way back to the ancient world. Again, guns change everything. Now, it takes time to change everything. The first guns on warships are going to be relatively light, and again, are probably going to be somewhat more close to anti-personnel guns designed to help clear the decks of a ship that, say, you'd like to move alongside and board. There are, of course, risks to having anything incendiary on a wooden warship. This may explain why the closest thing that we've come to sort of pure incendiary warfare in the European experience, Greek fire, which again seems to be basically some kind of pump that shoots out a bituminous substance that is ignited, basically a very crude flamethrower. This doesn't spread. The Byzantines use it with some success, actually. But my guess is the reason it doesn't spread is that's just a good darn way to burn down your own ship. Now, gunpowder will also prove a real hazard for wooden warships, which can catch on fire, or worse, a powder magazine can explode and the whole ship goes up in a catastrophic explosion. But as we'll see, cannons are so effective that the risks of putting cannons on warships the rewards of putting cannons on warships outweigh the risks. Now, in the Mediterranean, galley-style warships, so oared warships, are in use all the way up until the late 16th century. Indeed, the last big battle in really almost kind of global history, where oared warships, galleys, fight one another, is the Battle of Lepanto, fought between the Ottoman Empire, very much a gunpowder empire, and a coalition of Christian states who have interest in opposing Ottoman expansion, including the Venetian Empire. And the Venetians are based up in Venice, but have a kind of extended sort of set of holdings, mostly in the Aegean, and also a coalition called the Catholic League, but based around the Holy Roman Empire, that finds its southern holdings menaced by Ottoman expansion up through the Balkans. So the Battle of Lepanto is this Catholic League against the Ottomans, and the Ottomans lose. And this does seem to somewhat suspend some Ottoman expansion into the Mediterranean. This is a battle in which Miguel Cervantes fights in and famously loses his hand. He becomes the Manco de Lepanto, the one-handed man from Lepanto. But importantly, this is still fought with galleys, oared warships, even though many of these galleys are starting to have cannons. Both Phoenician and Ottoman galleys have room for cannons. But here's the problem with cannons on a galley. The rowers themselves take up a ton of space. Now, the rowers allow you again to maneuver very effectively because you're not beholden to the wind. When you've got the rowers, you can go in any direction you want without worrying about which direction the wind's blowing or whether you need to tack or not. And also, they can turn the ship very quickly. An oared warship with a good, well-trained crew can just spin about on a dime. So that has some advantages, but when you're starting to put every place where a rower is sitting and every place where his oar is sticking out is one more place you can't put a cannon. So therefore there's a real trade-off that you have galleys that, yes, they have cannon, but they've got so many rowers that, yes, this gives them a lot of maneuverability, but less place for guns. So more rowers and maneuverability, or guns and potentially less maneuverability. So Lepanto, even though it's primarily fought with these galleys, it is nonetheless, as you can sort of see some of these images, a lot of fire is being exchanged. 1571 therefore sort of marks a kind of an inflection point as we're moving, this is the end of oar power and moving towards sail power. But sail power, while again the ships themselves are less maneuverable, they're more beholden to the wind, also means that all of the space of a warship can be given over to guns. Now, ships, European ship design for both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic has been starting really in the 15th century. Ships start to become bigger and more sophisticated, starting with the Portuguese capital ship, the carrack. Starts to be bigger multi-masted ships. So, for example, the famous warship, the Mary Rose. And then we get ships like the galleon of Spain, the big galley that has multiple masts and also simply a very high hull that protrudes from the water. Now, these ships get big for a number of reasons. One, just techniques of naval architecture get bigger. Another reason they get bigger is these ships are being built for trade, and so naval architects are simply trying to find ways to make bigger ships that can carry more stuff. And also, particularly on the Atlantic, where there's a lot more wind than the Mediterranean, they're getting bigger so that they can have more masts and taller masts that can capture more wind and actually propel the ship faster and further. So these are all reasons the ships are getting big even before naval guns become a big factor. But it also means that European ship design, by the time we get into the 16th and 17th century, is producing very large ships with hulls that rise very far out of the water. And these start to become perfect platforms for big European-style artillery pieces, the kind of pieces that have already been developed to deal with all of these thin stone-walled castles that are common across Europe. Now, in conclusion, I just want to think about some of the potential implications for the changes in naval warfare. One implication that I think is going to be important, particularly when we think about the development of Western European states, the capitalization of gunpowder navies is going to be extraordinary. Now, navies have always involved a degree of capital expenditure, whether it's the Athenian Navy or the Roman Navy or the Carthaginian Navy or the Viking war fleets. But that said, the kind of capital expenditure that it takes to build an extraordinary, a 50, 80, 100 gun warship is significant. Not any particular nation state can do it. They have to have some level of not just technical expertise, and of course that technical expertise may exist in places that otherwise wouldn't be military powerhouses like Holland, but it also takes capital, the money to purchase the wood, the tar, the pitch, the rope, the cannon, the gunpowder, the extraordinary amount of naval stores. And so what we're actually going to see is states, in order to maintain not just large armies, but also particularly large navies, are going to need to develop really new intensive fiscal apparatuses in order to fund this kind of war effort. Also, the fact that it's probably not, it's not just a coincidence that these changes in naval architecture that give us the grand warships of the golden age of sail, ships like the HMS Victory or the USS Constitution, which in the kind of final iteration, are developing also in a moment of Atlantic exploration. The creation of Atlantic world, which begins with Columbus's discovery of some islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off of what he thinks is the coast of Japan, but is in fact a new continent. And of course, by the early 16th century, it's becoming apparent that no, indeed, there is a completely new world, and a world that is full of potential resources, a world that is full of potential capital. But also, in order to exploit that new world, you actually need the kind of huge ships capable of transatlantic voyages that can compete in a new world of great power competition between Spain and Britain and France. This is going to be one reason why they need to deploy these new war fleets that really can only exist, or not only exist, but primarily will come to dominate the Atlantic. So in some ways, I think it's time at this point to introduce another just radical new development that really changes the course of European warfare, in addition to changing the course of warfare in the Americas. And that is precisely the discovery of the Americas, the shift of European imperialism towards the Americas, and also the impact of resources from the Americas on the capitalization and the finance of European warfare. So we'll be talking about that next week. See you soon.